question about occupational therapy. Um, this was something that even through all my advocacy and studying about what dyslexia is and how do you treat it and everything else, um, I didn't realize that occupational therapy even played a role here. I mean, because anytime you hear occupational therapy, I mean, you think of rehabbing your muscle movements, being able to eat and things like that. Um, so, can you talk a little bit about how occupational therapy ties into remediation of dyslexia,
Yeah.
or can I should say?
Well, it's interesting you ask because today we are at the American Occupational Therapy Association's annual conference. We're meeting with OTs, talking with OTs, and this is a conference that has, gosh, I think it said about 7,000 people are here in attendance. So it's a really large conference. And it's OTs from all over the world come together to learn more about their profession, about the research. And what relates to OT and to languages, we know that every language in the world, you speak it first, you learn to read it second, you learn to spell it after that, you learn to do writing after that, and then typically comes mathematics after that. So there's a developmental hierarchy of our language skills. If you really want to look and see how does phonological awareness develop, you have to look at the infant, because the parents just have to ask yourself the question of, at what age did my child start learning the sounds of their native language? And the bottom line is, hopefully you started speaking to them as soon as they were born. And that's when the brain starts to begin to pick up these language sounds that are the native language. So there's a researcher at the University of Washington out in Seattle, and she spent more than 50 years just studying the development of speech perception, which just means you're perceiving input, listening speech skills, and your speech production, which means your speaking skills. And she spent more than 50 years just studying how that develops from birth to age 1. That's how complicated this system is. But what the research clearly shows is it is a multisensory speech processor that develops first before you get to the actual letters of literacy. And part of speech is acoustic, of course, because you hear the sounds the person's saying. But the other part of speech is visual. There's laser eye tracking studies that show that when you look at 2-month, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12-month babies, the question they were trying to answer is, where do babies look when they're face to face with mom and dad? And the answer was, from 2 months to 6 months, they actually look at mom and dad's eyes. Right around 8 months of age, the majority of babies start looking at mom and dad's mouth. And what we think they're doing is they're starting to pick up on, hey, that thing moving there, that mouth, those lips, has something to do with the sounds that I'm hearing as well. And they start to begin to map visual from what you see with acoustic from what you hear. And so that's one of the first beginnings of that beginning stage of the multisensory phonological awareness development. You're watching the person's mouth move and you're hearing the sounds come out of it. And that's not enough to fully develop phonological processing, because if that was enough, then you'd be able to tell if I go or you'd be able to say, hey, is that the same sound or a different sound? Your ear could just pick up on it, tell it all by itself. But truth is, it's really hard to do. But if I give you visual along with the auditory input and I go, you're like, oh, that's F and TH. Now the visual helps me, quote, hear the sounds that you're making. So that begins to help aid your speech perception. And everybody does this when you're in a social environment and the background noise starts to get kind of loud. You'll almost automatically start looking at the person's lips who's talking to you, and just looking at their lips kind of helps you, quote, hear better. Didn't make their voice any louder, but you're using two sensory systems together to perceive speech. Problem is, when a child is speaking, they can't see their own mouth. So you can't use vision to help you know what you're saying. And sounds don't always sound alike when you're speaking. Even the to your own ear might sound a little bit different or a little bit the same. So there's two more sensory systems that we know begin to build phonological awareness. And that is movement of the teeth, tongue, and lips. We call that kinesthetic. And it's touch, the contact points of the teeth, tongue and lips while you're saying sounds. We call that tactile. So it's oral tactile, which is touch, and oral kinesthetic, which is movement. Those are working together. So now we've got 4 sensory systems building your phonological processing. So OTs are experts in the sensory motor system. They look at fine motor skills, they look at oral motor skills, they look at tactile, they look at touch, they look at all these different systems together. So OTs can actually be doing things that actually begin to build better awareness of your mouth movement, better awareness of which parts of the mouth are touching, better awareness of what you see and how the mouth is moving. So there's a degree of OT that combines together, even though most of the time OTs are going to be working towards fine motor skills and buttons and handling zippers and tying shoes and later higher level skills like handwriting. But OTs are really thoroughly trained in a sensory integration approach, understand the lower level sensory motor skills and the higher level sensory motor skills. And that means they understand how their sensory motor system also builds part of that phonological speech processing. So the OTs who are actually properly trained in a sensory integration approach, and this is what we require all of our OTs to do at a Morris Center clinic. The Morris Center clinic has OTs who are expertly trained in fine motor, gross motor, coordination, core trunk, vestibular, which is balance, proprioception, which is body awareness, and all the precursor sensory motor systems that relate to your language system. So when OTs are working on building all these systems, it can actually make our dyslexia treatment progress even faster because we're improving the inputs and the awareness of those sensory motor parts of the body, which improves the ability for them to begin to wire together and connect together, which improves their ability to begin to retrain and strengthen your phonological processing. So we jokingly tell the OTs here at the conference, if you want to find the 5-year-olds who are most at risk for dyslexia, this is not a proven study. This is what we call a neurological soft sign. If you want to see which 5-year-olds are most likely to not really have that oral sensory awareness working really well, go watch a groom of kindergartners eat lunch. And you see some of them are very neat, very tidy. They take care of their food well. Others have their lunch smeared all over their face. They have jello up their nose and they have ketchup hanging off their lips and they literally don't feel it. That tells you that their sensory system is not picking up the input as easily or as well. It's kind of like pain thresholds. Some people, they cut their finger and they don't even know they've cut themselves, but they have the same neurology. They have the same pain receptors in their finger as somebody else who cuts themselves and they start screaming like they broke their arm. It's like an excruciating degree of pain. And we call that people with a low pain threshold or a high pain threshold. Well, those thresholds of awareness of sensory input also relate to your awareness of what the mouth is doing, where the mouth is, how the mouth is moving, what parts are working. So the more of these oral motor pieces and the acoustic pieces and the visual pieces are giving the brain really strong, good input, the better the brain's going to build that phonological processing.